Hi, I'm Altha, and my mother-in-law once told me I wasn't worth being in the family photo. Not in those exact words, but with a missing frame, a cropped smile, and silence where my name should have been. They laughed about my job, said fixing air conditioners wasn't elevated. Then they boxed up my clothes while I was still living in the house. But now, the same woman who erased me is sleeping in her car, asking me to sign over the home she once said I didn't belong in. Funny how fast the crown falls, isn't it? But what happened between those photos and her downfall? That's the part no one talks about. What would you do if the person who broke you came back, not to apologize, but to beg? They say spring in Savannah has a way of bringing everything to life. But that morning, as I zipped up the dress Valora had kindly suggested I wear for the family portrait, I felt more like I was dressing for a role than a celebration. It wasn't my color, too pastel, too prim, but she'd left it hanging on the door with a little note. It'll photograph well against the azaleas. Trust me. Trust. That word had already started to sound like a joke in my head. Dorian was shaving when I walked out of the bathroom. "You look good," he said casually, not turning to see me. "Mom's gonna love it." "That's the goal, isn't it?" I replied, trying not to sound bitter. His silence said he heard it anyway. The whole family was already gathered when we arrived. Valora in her classic pearls, Malis with her tablet out like she was managing a conference, Cressida snapping selfies in the mirror. I greeted everyone politely, got the obligatory hugs from those who half remembered my name, and tried not to feel like an outsider at my own family's event. "Altha, dear," Valora cooed as she air-kissed my cheek. "Would you mind grabbing the wine from the cellar? You know the one. Bottom shelf, marked Cabernet. We'll need it for the toasts." I glanced at the photographer unpacking lenses. "Now?" "Oh, honey, we've got time. Besides, I trust you not to mix them up like Dorian always does." She chuckled, waving me off. I didn't argue. I wanted so badly to be useful. No, to be wanted, that I played right along. The cellar was cold and dim, and it took longer than expected to locate the right bottle. When I came back up, the family was laughing, adjusting positions, and then, flash, another flash, and it was done. The family portrait. They hadn't waited. Dorian offered a shrug when I looked at him. "Timing, babe." "You know how Mom is about schedules." "I was gone less than 10 minutes, I said, voice steady but tight. "She didn't mean anything by it," he said. "It was just logistics." Later that evening, after everyone had gone and the photographer had packed up, I helped clean up. That's when I saw it. Already printed, already framed, already mounted. A massive, glossy photo of the entire family, all smiling, all neatly arranged. Without me. Valora stood beside me, admiring it. "Turned out well, don't you think?" I stared at the frame. "You're missing someone." She tilted her head, her tone sweet as syrup. "Oh, darling, we can always Photoshop you in if you like, but this was just the core family, you understand." I didn't reply, not because I agreed, but because I'd finally understood what was happening. This wasn't an oversight. This was a pattern. The next day, I came back for a lunch invitation. Valora had insisted. It was one of those overly polite requests that didn't feel optional. The table was set, the air was too scented, and as we sat down, Dorian's Aunt Eloise smiled at me. "How'd you like the quilt?" she asked. I blinked. "What quilt?" "You know, the one your parents sent you after the wedding, handmade. Your mother said she spent weeks on it." I felt my stomach knot. "I never received it." Eloise looked genuinely puzzled. "Valora said she passed it along." Valora appeared from the kitchen at that moment, her timing uncanny. "Something wrong?" "I never got the quilt from my parents," I said, calmly but firmly. Her eyebrows lifted just slightly. "Oh dear, It must have been misplaced. We had so many gifts coming through, so much going on. I'll have a look later. After lunch, while Dorian and Eloise walked out to the garden, I excused myself to use the restroom. On my way down the hall, I paused outside the guest bedroom. I opened the door without knocking. There it was. A white box, neatly tucked behind Valora's luggage, the card still taped to the top. My mother's handwriting, unmistakable. I closed the door gently, walked out of the house without saying a word. Dorian called after me, but I didn't stop. That night, I stared at the family photo hanging in our hallway, and for the first time, I didn't see a mistake. I saw a message. Thanksgiving at Valora's house had all the ingredients for a Southern magazine spread: maple-glazed ham, crystal serving bowls, candles flickering atop a lace runner. But what it offered in aesthetics, it lacked in sincerity. I arrived early to help, apron in hand, sleeves rolled up, trying, again, to prove I was part of the family, not just a guest who married in. Valora greeted me with her usual polished grace, her smile too perfect to trust. "Well, you're punctual," she said as she opened the door, eyeing my jeans and boots with the faintest flicker of disapproval. "You might want to leave those boots by the door, dear. Mud and mahogany floors don't mix well." I looked down. They were clean. "Sure," I said, pulling them off and stepping into her immaculate foyer. In the kitchen, she handed me a list clipped to a floral notepad, her preferred way of delegating. "If you can take care of the green bean casserole, that'd be wonderful. Oh, and no onions." Dorian hates them. Dorian didn't hate onions. I'd made him French onion soup the week before, and he'd licked the bowl, but I didn't argue. As we prepped, she hummed along to a vintage gospel record, occasionally pausing to give me suggestions on how a daughter-in-law should present herself at a family holiday. "You know, Altha," she said, not looking up from the sweet potato mash, "a dress with a little shape would be more festive than jeans and a flannel. Just a thought." I smiled politely. "Next time, I'll wear pearls." She didn't laugh, just stirred. Dorian arrived with a 6-pack of craft beer and gave me a distracted kiss on the cheek. He didn't ask how the morning had gone. He didn't even notice I was still barefoot. Dinner was served at 4 o'clock sharp, as dictated by Valora's internal clock and the position of the sun on her dining room curtains. The table was full. Relatives from out of town, cousins I barely remembered, and Valora at the head, beaming like a queen in her court. She stood, glass in hand. "Before we eat, I just want to say how grateful I am for this family, for my strong son, Dorian, who's doing so well at the bank, for Malus, who just got promoted, for Cressida, who's taken on a leadership role in her church's women's group. This family, it's built something meaningful." The silence after her toast wasn't awkward, it was pointed. I wasn't mentioned. I sipped my water, tried not to shift in my seat. Then someone, Eloise maybe, turned to me. "Altha, what do you do again?" Before I could open my mouth, Valora chuckled. "She fixes AC units. But hey, better than being unemployed, right?" There was a beat of silence, followed by a few strained laughs. My face burned. Dorian didn't say a word. He reached for the gravy. I forced a smile. "It pays the bills," I said, my voice steady. "And some days, it keeps people from melting into their own couches." No one responded. Later, after dessert, I stepped out to the porch. The cool air wrapped around me like a towel soaked in truth. I was trying to fit into a family that kept shrinking the frame. Eloise joined me. "You know, I've been meaning to ask, how'd you like the quilt?" I blinked. "Quilt?" "The one your parents sent you after the wedding. Handmade. I saw pictures of it. Valora said she gave it to you right after your honeymoon." I never got it, I said slowly. Her brow furrowed. That's odd. She was so specific about it. Said you loved it. I didn't say anything, just nodded and excused myself. Back inside, I walked toward the guest room, past the line of family coats, Valora's framed diplomas, and the powder room scented with lavender oil. The door creaked as I pushed it open. There it was, a white box still taped shut. My mother's handwriting on the label. The quilt folded neatly, untouched. Behind Valora's luggage, I closed the door softly and returned to the living room. I didn't confront her, not yet, because in that moment I realized something deeper than offense. I wasn't being overlooked, I was being erased. And worse, my husband thought silence would protect me. The Sunday after Thanksgiving passed with fewer words between Dorian and me than there were dishes in Valora's china cabinet. And that silence, it was thicker than gravy left to sit too long. That evening, I sat at my desk, sorting through the stack of mail that had piled up over the past few weeks. Among the bills and holiday cards was a large white envelope from the mortgage company. I wasn't expecting anything from them. My name wasn't even on the account. That had always seemed like a formality, until now. I pulled up the digital records on the county property appraiser's website. Our address, parcel number, tax record. Owner, Dorian Lee Monroe. Just him. There was no and Altha, no indication of the promises whispered after champagne toasts or the gentle hand squeezes that came with, "We'll handle it after the holidays." Just him. As if I was living in a home I didn't belong to. Again, I sat back, letting the words blur on the screen. This wasn't just a mistake or an oversight. This was deliberate. A part of a bigger pattern I hadn't fully seen or hadn't wanted to. That family portrait without me, the hidden quilt. And now this. I printed the page, added it to a newly labeled folder in my desk drawer, just in case. 2 days later, I stood in the kitchen at Valora's house, helping prep for another family gathering, this time a fundraiser planning meeting. The air was thick with cinnamon, but it couldn't mask the tension that had been fermenting. From the dining room, I heard Valora talking with her sister, Gloria. They didn't see me standing just around the corner. "She plays sweet," Valora whispered, "but I see what she's after. Dorian's too kind to notice, but she's working her way into everything. This house, the name, the money." Gloria chuckled. "Well, she did marry in. That's how it works." Valora clicked her tongue. "Not in this family." I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just kept chopping celery while my pulse beat like a drum in my ears. At church that Sunday, the whispers followed me like a scent I couldn't shake. The polite nods were tighter, more calculated. I caught Aunt May avoiding my eye as if I'd suddenly grown horns. No one said anything outright, but I felt it. Like someone had pre-written a version of me and started circulating it without my permission. And the worst part? No one was asking for my side. I wasn't being questioned. I was being categorized. That night, I confronted Dorian. We were sitting on opposite ends of the couch. The TV was on, but neither of us was really watching. "I looked up the deed," I began. His head didn't move. "Yeah? My name's not on it." He exhaled through his nose, eyes still fixed on the screen. "It's just paperwork, Altha. We've been busy. We'll get to it." "We've been married 6 months." He finally turned. "What are you trying to say?" I faced him fully. "I'm saying I'm your wife, not your tenant. I shouldn't have to beg for inclusion, on paper or otherwise." He stood, rubbed his temples. "You're reading too much into this. My mom's just traditional. She likes things a certain way. And you? What do you like? I asked. Silence. He walked out of the room. I didn't follow. I spent the rest of that night going through every folder we had. Bank statements, utility bills, insurance, everything was in his name. Everything. I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat at my desk, clicking through PDFs and sipping lukewarm tea. Every click was a page of proof, not just of oversight, but of orchestration. By sunrise, the folder labeled "Just in Case" had grown thicker. It was no longer about paranoia. It was preparation. Because in that moment, I didn't just feel unwelcome, I felt unprotected. The sun had barely risen when I started folding programs in the church basement, weeks before the gala. I coordinated caterers, organized silent auction items, handled donation tracking. Every moving piece that no one saw, I held in place. And I did it quietly, because I thought if I worked hard enough, I'd finally be part of something real. The Monroe Family Foundation Gala was the biggest annual event in our part of Savannah, and this year, Dorian's family was being honored for their contributions. Technically, the planning committee should have been run by me, but technically never counted for much with Valora. On the day of the event, the venue glowed under soft lighting and fresh flower arrangements I had sourced under budget. Everyone was dressed in their finest. Valora showed up 40 minutes late in a full-length emerald gown, dripping in jewelry and fake gratitude. "Sorry I'm late," she announced, loud enough for the microphone to catch it. "So hard to find decent drivers these days." The room laughed. The mayor shook her hand like they were old friends. When the MC introduced her, he said, "Please welcome the woman who made tonight possible, Valora Monroe." I stood just outside the spotlight, smile frozen. My name wasn't mentioned. Not once. Dorian clapped. He didn't look at me. I was scheduled to give the closing remarks. My cue was after the final musical performance and right before the toast. I held the note cards in my hand, fingertips sweating. I'd written them carefully, about teamwork, quiet labor, and how unseen effort holds communities together. Valora was sipping champagne near the stage when her glass suddenly slipped. She gasped, staggered sideways, and collapsed with a dramatic flair that would have made a soap actress blush. Gasps. People rushed. Someone yelled to call 911. The music stopped mid-note. I stood frozen, half from concern, half from knowing deep in my bones this wasn't real. Our EMTs arrived, checked her vitals. After a short huddle, one of them whispered to me, "Everything's normal." She refused transport, said she felt overwhelmed. By then, the room had cleared. My speech was canceled. My name, still not spoken. 2 days later, Valora posted a picture on Facebook, her arm around the mayor, captioned, "What a privilege to have played a role in such a beautiful night. Grateful to those who made it shine." Not a word about me, not a single photo I was in. I commented once, just one sentence. Sometimes the people who shine the brightest are standing in someone else's light. Dorian called me 20 minutes later. "Delete that," he said. "No," I replied. "She's your family, and I'm your wife." He was silent, again. I went into the bedroom and took out my speech, the one never delivered. I slid it into a folder already containing property records, screenshots of texts, and the picture of that damn family portrait without me. I added a label on the tab, "Proof of Pattern." Later that night, I ironed a backup dress and placed it in a garment bag. I reprinted my speech, sealed it in a fireproof folder, because when someone steals your voice enough times, you stop giving them the microphone. 5 days after the gala, Valora hosted a post-event brunch at her house. She called it a celebration, but everything about it felt rehearsed. The silverware placement, the seating chart, even the lavender scent wafting from every room, it was all too intentional. I wore a simple navy dress and flats, comfortable, practical. Not a single person complimented it, which told me more than enough. As we sat down, Valora raised her mimosa and beamed like the first lady of a country no one elected her to rule. "Now that the gala's behind us," she began, "it's so nice to finally just enjoy family time." She tapped her glass with a spoon. "And speaking of family, I'm so happy that Chelsea could join us today." Heads turned as Chelsea entered the room, a tall, polished brunette in a tailored dress that probably cost more than my car's last repair. Valora gestured toward her. "Everyone, this is Chelsea. She's the daughter of an old friend, works in corporate law. Traveled all the way from Charlotte." Chelsea smiled like she belonged. Valora went on, her eyes dancing between Dorian and Chelsea. "Funny story. Dorian actually met her years ago at a fundraiser before he settled down." She laughed. Others laughed. Dorian didn't. I felt a slow heat climb my chest, but I smiled, because I'd learned by now that a woman who frowns in public becomes the villain in private. "Nice to meet you, Chelsea," I said calmly. "Likewise," she replied, polite as a pageant queen. We moved on to quiche and polite conversation, but something had shifted. Every glance Valora gave me was sharper, more certain. I wasn't imagining the audition she had just staged. That evening, I received a text from my cousin asking if I was going to the Christmas cabin trip. "What trip?" I asked. She sent a screenshot of the new family group chat. "Core family only." My name wasn't there. Dorian was. So were Malis, Cressida, Valora. I scrolled back through our old group chat. Messages had stopped 3 days ago. I had sent a meme. No one responded, not even with a thumbs up. I could have cried, but I didn't. I'd done enough of that. Instead, I opened my laptop and began typing. No flourish, no guilt. Subject, clarification. Message. If I am to remain in this marriage, I require to be treated like family in all forms, legally, verbally, and socially. This is not a request. It is a boundary. I hit send. Dorian called within 10 minutes. "Why are you making this dramatic?" he said, his voice tight. "Because being erased politely is still being erased," I replied. "You don't get to make it invisible just because it's quiet." He sighed, but didn't answer. The call ended in a fog of static and silence. That night, I didn't sleep in our room. I moved my pillow and blanket to the guest bed. As I passed the hallway, I looked at the framed family photo again, the one from months ago, the one without me. I didn't feel sad. I felt ready. Back in the guest room, I opened the drawer, pulled out the just-in-case folder, and added a printed copy of my email. 5 documents now. I wasn't waiting for the next insult. I was preparing for it. The kitchen smelled like lemon cleaner and entitlement. Valora was standing near the stove, stirring a pot of something she didn't cook, while Dorian leaned against the counter, sipping coffee like he hadn't just spent the last week ignoring the silence between us. I had only stepped in to grab my work boots from the back door. I hadn't expected an ambush. "Your mom's been thinking," Dorian said, casual like he was commenting on the weather. "Maybe it's time you take a step back from HVAC. It's not the most polished look for our family." Valora turned, her tone syrupy sweet. "Your energy could be better used helping Malis with her online brand. You're great with details, and it's a cleaner lifestyle." My jaw tightened. I set the boots down. "You don't get to dictate who I become." Dorian blinked. "It's not about control." "Then what is it about?" I asked. "Image? Optics?" "Because I'm not a cocktail party accessory." Valora laughed lightly, brushing a non-existent crumb from her blouse. "Sweetheart, we're just trying to elevate you." I looked at both of them, my husband and his mother, and saw no recognition in their faces, no reflection of me in their eyes, just expectation, agenda. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I just turned and walked upstairs. Later that evening, I went into our bedroom to grab my pajamas. I opened my drawer. Empty. I stood there for a second, thinking maybe Dorian had reorganized. Then I noticed the guest room door slightly ajar. Inside the hallway closet were boxes, labeled my clothes, my shoes, my winter coat. I walked back into the bedroom, and Dorian was changing into his gym clothes. "Why are my things boxed up?" He didn't look at me. "Mom thought it'd be easier for house guests." "In our home?" I asked, my voice sharp. "It's not permanent. Just temporary while you erase me gently." He finally looked at me. "Don't twist it, Altha." But the truth was already straight. I said nothing more. I took one of the boxes, placed it by the door, and began packing a small overnight bag. Toiletries, 2 changes of clothes, my speech folder. He watched, but didn't stop me. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Somewhere I'm not a guest." I called my mother on the way over. She didn't ask questions. She just said, "Come." By the time I pulled into her driveway, the street lights had flickered on. Her porch light was already lit, casting a soft glow over the steps. She opened the door before I knocked. I stepped inside, dropped the bag, and exhaled for the first time in days. We sat on the couch. I explained everything, not just the boxes, but the build-up, the portrait, the quilt, the erased messages, the dinner stabs dressed up as compliments, the woman who called herself family while cutting out my identity like it was dead weight. My mother listened quietly, her hands folded, her expression calm but fierce. When I finished, she said, "This isn't a season for weakness. This is your reckoning." The next morning, I woke up early and called my supervisor. "Hey, is that weekend shift still open?" I asked. "You want it?" she replied, surprised. "I do." It wasn't about money. It was about purpose, about reclaiming something they couldn't box up. Before heading out, I pulled the just-in-case folder from my bag, added a fresh page. Separation begins, not just emotional, physical, documented. I zipped it shut. Leaving my house didn't break me. It confirmed I wasn't crazy. 4 days had passed since I left the house I once called home. I had started sleeping better, not because I was at peace, but because the waiting was over. I knew now where I stood, and I wasn't standing alone in the dark anymore. That morning, while sipping weak coffee in my mother's kitchen, a message popped up on my phone. It was from Valora. "Let's meet. No drama. Just a chance to clear the air. Brunch this Saturday?" I stared at the screen for a long minute. There was a time I would have taken that as a sign of reconciliation. Now I read it for what it was. A setup. Still, curiosity tugged harder than caution, so I replied, "Fine. Public place." Saturday arrived, and I met her at a bistro downtown, neutral territory. She wore her pearls and a powder blue suit, as if she were about to take the witness stand. She smiled too wide, too warm. "I'm glad you came," she said, reaching for my hand like we were old friends catching up. "It's silly for us to let misunderstandings grow into grudges." I raised an eyebrow. "Misunderstandings usually don't involve boxed-up clothes and deleted group chats." She waved that off with a manicured hand. "Old habits. My fault entirely." Then came the folder. She slid it across the table. "Just some documents, housekeeping. It's about the title transfer on one of the properties. Nothing major. The lawyer messed up some formatting, so we're just updating signatures." I didn't touch it. "I'll take a look later." Her smile twitched. "Of course. No rush." We finished brunch with fake laughter and meaningless talk about the gala. I walked away feeling like I had just sat through an audition I never asked for. Back at my mother's, I opened the folder. Tucked inside the neatly labeled pages was a clause, buried like a landmine. If signed, the document would remove me from any claim to the Monroe marital home, reassigning ownership to Dorian as a corrective title action. I stared at the sentence until the words bled together. Then I called Grace, a paralegal at my job who had helped with contract templates before. She looked it over and confirmed what I already suspected. This isn't an update, it's a removal. I felt my stomach turn, but my hands stayed steady. So this was never an apology, I said aloud. It was a negotiation disguised as forgiveness. The next morning, an envelope arrived via overnight mail. Inside, an invoice from a plumbing company, urgent repairs, due immediately. The address listed wasn't ours, it was Valora's lake cabin. I checked the billing code. Somehow it was routed through our joint property management account, the one Dorian had insisted we keep active, just in case. I texted him. Care to explain this $980 invoice for a cabin I've never stepped foot in? He replied 5 minutes later, she thought you were still handling the finances. Probably a mix-up. I'll talk to her. I didn't answer. I was too busy printing the invoice, highlighting the routing code, and adding it to the folder now thick enough to need a rubber band. On the cover, I scribbled 2 new words. Track everything. Then I made a spreadsheet. Dates, amounts, recipients. I pulled old statements, downloaded backup emails, and scanned every document Valora had ever forwarded, just FYI. She'd tried to steal a signature. She forgot I had learned how to read. 2 days after I refused to sign away my rights, Dorian called. His voice was the same smooth tone he used when trying to sell me peace like a product. Mom wants to clear the air, he said. She's planning a small gathering, family only, says it's not an ambush. An ambush was exactly what it was. When I arrived at Valora's house that Sunday, the living room had been staged like a courtroom without the honesty. Everyone was seated. Malis, arms crossed, Cressida pretending to scroll her phone, Uncle Stan and Aunt Eloise flanking the fireplace like judges, and Quincy, my quiet supporter, seated near the window with a legal pad on his lap. Valora stood in the center, hands gently clasped. Her voice trembled just enough to seem human. This has all been a big misunderstanding, she began. We're a family, and families have tension, but love at the core is what holds us. I let her finish. I didn't interrupt. I let her string together every illusion she had left. When she glanced at me, I nodded, encouraging her to keep going. Then she shifted. Some people, she said, her eyes cutting sideways toward me, have chosen to misread intentions, to take generosity and paint it as manipulation. That's not just unfair, it's dangerous. I reached down and picked up the manila folder from my bag. I placed it on the coffee table in front of her. Let's be clear, I said calmly. This isn't about misinterpretation, it's about evidence. I opened the folder. First, I held up a printed screenshot. A text from you to Malis. Once she signs, we're in the clear. Dated last Tuesday. Murmurs. Second, the deed transfer clause, hidden in legalese, reassigns the marital home solely to Dorian, without my consent. Quincy leaned forward. I reviewed it. The clause was intentionally obscured. Third, I continued, flipping another page. Screenshots from the family group chat, core family only. I wasn't in it, but Dorian was. So, we're both your daughters. So tell me, what exactly does core mean? Uncle Stan rubbed his chin. Wait, what? Valora straightened, her mask slipping slightly. This is all taken out of context. I was protecting my family. From me? I asked, meeting her eyes. Or from the truth? The room went quiet. Then I took out my phone. There's one more thing. I pressed play. Valora's voice filled the space, recorded during that brunch at the bistro. You crop them out long enough, they start cropping themselves. Then another line. She's too basic to understand legal language. That's what makes her manageable. No one moved. Malis finally looked up from her phone. Quincy closed his notebook. That recording is authentic. Valora's face paled. She opened her mouth, but nothing coherent came out. You didn't expect me to speak, I said softly. You counted on me staying quiet, on Dorian staying neutral, and on everyone else being too polite to ask questions. I stood. This ends here. When I walked out of that house, I didn't slam the door. I left it open just long enough for everyone else to see what was inside. 1 week after the confrontation in Valora's living room, the family group chat went silent. Not silent in a passive way, silent like a theater after the final act. No more dinner invites, no photos of Cressida's new dog, no inspirational quotes from Aunt Eloise, just stillness. Valora's name hadn't been mentioned, not even once. And Dorian? He called twice, once to ask if I was still mad, and another to say, it's just complicated right now. I let both go to voicemail. I wasn't chasing explanations anymore. I was watching how people behaved when no one asked them to perform. I went back to work at full capacity. My coworkers noticed something was different. I was quieter, more focused. I started journaling again, eating solo dinners without checking my phone for family updates I once craved like air. When power breaks, I wrote one night, it doesn't scream, it just stops being answered. 3 days later, I received a forwarded envelope from our old address. The handwriting was Valora's, but the contents weren't meant for me. Inside was a copy of a foreclosure notice. Her primary residence, her beloved Monroe estate, was in default. The letter included a list of unpaid liens, back taxes, and a final date for eviction. I read it twice, not to savor it, but to be sure it was real. Then my phone buzzed. A text from one of Valora's former tenants at her rental property downtown. Hey, just wondering if you're still handling her finances. She said you were helping with the taxes. I got a new rent notice, double the amount. I didn't reply. Later that afternoon, I drove by Valora's estate, not to gawk, but to see, to understand what collapse looked like when it wore pearls. The driveway was empty. No gardener, no scent of baked goods wafting from the windows. The porch light was on at 3 p.m., not from ambiance, but from neglect. I parked across the street, stepped out, and walked up the path. A realtor's flyer was tucked in the mailbox. Fixer-upper potential, motivated seller. I folded it into my purse and walked away. The next morning, I had a dentist appointment, a routine cleaning I'd pushed back twice. The receptionist looked confused when I handed over my insurance card. It's saying your coverage is inactive. I frowned. That's impossible. I haven't canceled anything. She stepped away, made a call, and returned with a quiet apology. It looks like a consolidation form was submitted weeks ago. Someone claiming to be your husband requested all family coverage be managed under his mother's household plan. I didn't say a word. I just nodded, paid the bill out of pocket, and left. At home, I opened my just-in-case folder and added the receipt. Then I flipped to the back and jotted down in red ink. Last sabotage confirmed. She's still playing, but I'm no longer in the game. Her name was still on things that were no longer hers. Mine wasn't, but I'd already claimed everything that mattered. The rain had been steady since late afternoon, soaking everything in Savannah with a kind of heaviness that felt fitting. It tapped on the windows like a nervous visitor. My daughter was in bed early, curled beneath the quilt my mother had made. I was about to put on a pot of chamomile tea when the doorbell rang. I froze. It rang again, slower this time. I walked to the front window and peeled back the curtain just enough, Valora. Standing in the rain with her suitcase, hair plastered to her face, mascara streaking down her cheeks like ink bleeding from an old page. For a brief moment, I thought I might be imagining it. But no, there she was, gripping the handle of a wheeled bag, drenched, alone. I opened the door only part way. She didn't wait for me to speak. "I have nowhere else," she said, her voice thin but desperate. "The foundation cut me out. My attorney quit. Cressida stopped answering my calls. I'm your family. You live in the house I helped build." Behind me, the kettle began to whistle, shrill and sharp. I didn't step aside. I didn't offer a towel. Valora looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. Not physically, emotionally. The towering image of the woman who once orchestrated every move of the household was now a soggy, discarded version of herself. Earlier that day, my daughter had crawled onto my lap while I folded laundry. "Grandma said Daddy would have married someone better if it weren't for you," she whispered, not in anger, just like she was repeating something she heard during a commercial. I'd paused, hugged her, said nothing, but that sentence had stayed with me all day, and now it pulsed like thunder behind Valora's eyes. I stepped outside, letting the rain soak my sleeves. I handed her a folded blanket from behind the door. She reached for it like a drowning woman would a rope, but I didn't invite her in. "You don't get to teach my child how to hate me," I said, my voice even. "You don't get to erase me and still ask for shelter." She blinked, stunned. "I'm your mother too," she whispered. "No," I said. "You tried to be my puppeteer." She shivered, pulled the blanket tighter around herself. I didn't offer more. The rain continued to fall in sheets. She tried to speak again, but I gently closed the door between us, not with anger, not with vengeance, just with finality. I leaned against the inside of the door, letting the quiet press against my back. Her tears didn't hit me. The rain had already done that. 3 days after Valora stood dripping on my porch, she tried again. This time, it came in the form of a letter, folded precisely, slid under my front door like a peace offering that reeked of desperation. It was handwritten. "I didn't do it because I hated you. I just never thought you were worthy." I read it once, then again. Then I walked to the trash, dropped it in, and pressed the lid closed. I didn't cry. I didn't clutch my chest or run my fingers through my hair like women do in those melodramatic movies. Instead, I opened a window, let the breeze fill the living room, and stared at the place that used to hold so much noise. Now it just breathed with me. That sentence, her sentence, wasn't a blade anymore. It was ash. Later that day, around 4:30, just before the sun dipped below the roofline, Dorian knocked. He didn't ring the bell. I watched him through the side window. He looked thinner, his suit wrinkled, his hair no longer gelled into place. I opened the door a few inches. He didn't smile. "I've been staying at the courtyard near the airport," he said. "I didn't know where else to go." "You have plenty of places," I said. "I meant places that feel like home." He stared down at his shoes, then back at me. "You can hate her, but she's still my mother." "And I was still your wife when you watched her erase me," I replied. He nodded, jaw tight. "I didn't know how to. I thought I was keeping the peace." "No," I said gently. "You were just silent. There's a difference." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a manila envelope. "If there's paperwork you want me to sign." I opened the door just wide enough to hand him my own copy, already signed, notarized, dated. The separation agreement. I'd finalized it with Quincy the day before. "You'll find what you need in here," I said. He took it without speaking. "I'm not angry, Dorian," I added. "I just don't have room for people who need to be convinced of my value." He nodded again, then turned and walked down the steps. I didn't watch him leave. That night, my daughter sat beside me as I filled out final forms. She was playing with a hair clip, twisting it on her fingers. "Will Grandma come back?" she asked, looking at me with her big, unblinking eyes. "She might try," I said. "But we don't open every knock." She nodded, satisfied. Kids don't need long speeches, just truth in short form. Later, I walked through the house slowly, touching the walls like they'd just become mine. Not legally, they already were, but spiritually. I sat in the living room, the place where I once felt like a guest in my own life, and listened to the quiet. It wasn't empty, it was honest. For the first time in a long time, I exhaled. I didn't need an apology anymore. I needed peace, and I had just signed for it. 2 weeks after I closed the door on Valora, I received an invitation to speak at the Monroe Family Foundation's spring board meeting. I read the email 3 times before replying with a simple yes. There was no mention of Valora in the invitation. I didn't need to ask why. The day of the event, I wore the same navy dress from that brunch, the one she said looked safe. This time, it wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about standing in something that fit me, not something she would have picked for a picture. The event was held at the downtown Civic Center, one of those buildings that looked grand from the outside but hummed with old air conditioning and folding chairs inside. The slideshow was already running when I arrived. Smiling faces, gala moments, donation tallies, and then it stopped. The host introduced me. I stepped up to the podium, my heels clicking against the tile, my breath steady. Behind me, the screen lit up with a photo of the family from last year's celebration, the one I was cropped out of. For a full 5 seconds, I let the room look at it. Then I clicked. The full version appeared. There I was, standing slightly off-center, hand on Dorian's back, smiling, fully there. "I was always in the picture," I said into the mic. "Sometimes, to see the truth, you have to look at what was removed." Silence, then scattered applause, not out of politeness, but understanding. I spoke for 5 minutes, about contribution, about presence, about how visibility doesn't start with being seen, it starts with refusing to be invisible. Afterward, people came up to thank me, even a few board members I hadn't met. "We had no idea," one woman said softly, "but we do now." The next morning, I met Quincy at the courthouse. We signed the final papers, full transfer of title, assets, liabilities, and all points in between. The deed to the house now read only my name. "It was never about the square footage," I told Quincy as we stepped outside. "It was about knowing no one could take it from me again." He nodded. "You earned every line on that paper." Later that week, Valora came by one last time. She didn't knock, just stood at the base of the steps, holding something wrapped in brown paper. I walked out and met her there, neither of us saying hello. She unwrapped it slowly, a photo frame. Inside was the family portrait, the real one. No crops, no edits, everyone intact, me included. "I found it in the bottom drawer," she said. "Figured you'd want it." I looked at the frame, then at her. "You didn't need to crop me out to feel seen," I said quietly. "You just needed to stop pretending you were the only one who mattered." She looked down. For the first time, she didn't try to reply. I took the frame, nodded, and walked back inside. She stayed there, on the sidewalk, for a few more seconds, then turned and left. I didn't watch her go. I hung the photo in my hallway, across from the front door. She edited me out for years. Now I've edited her out of my future.